Welcome to a discussion of the issues of the candidates running for the House District 54 seat here on your hometown news station, AM 1300 KGLO, as well as online at KGLOnews.com. I'm KGLO News Director Bob Fisher, and we are talking with the candidates for this House District, which includes the western third of Saragordo County, including Clear Lake, all of Franklin County, as well as the northern and far western portions of Butler County. As you may remember, former House Speaker Linda Upmeyer of Clear Lake announced at about this time last year that she would not be seeking re-election to the seat. And now let's meet the candidates running for this election for House District 54. Karen Koenig is the Democratic nominee for this position. Karen was born and raised on farms near Green Mountain and State Center in central Iowa. She spent 10 years working in the environmental education field after graduating from Iowa State University with a bachelor's degree in fisheries and wildlife biology. She went on to receive her bachelor's degree in elementary education from Buena Vista University and her master's in science education from the University of Northern Iowa. She's been a classroom teacher for the last 20 years, teaching 2 years of 4th and 5th grades in Sheffield before spending 15 years teaching middle school science. Most recently, she's been teaching talented and gifted of students of kindergarten through 8th grade students in Iowa Falls. Shannon Latham is the Republican nominee for this position. Shannon is a co-owner and vice president of Latham High-Tech Seeds of Alexander, a third-generation family-owned seed company. Prior to joining Latham Seeds full-time in 2007, she operated her own communications and public relations business. She earned her MBA from the University of Iowa, earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Iowa State University, where she double majored in ag journalism and public service administration in agriculture. And Bennett Smith is running for the House District 54 seat as an independent candidate. Bennett is an instructor of history and political science at North Iowa Area Community College. He is the chairperson of the College Senate at NIAC and is also an instructor in various lifelong learning programs. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in speech communication and Master of Arts degree in history from both Iowa State University. Bennett currently serves on the Clear Lake City Council. Candidates, I welcome you to our discussion of the issues today. And for those listening to the radio version of this program, we're all socially distanced in our own spaces instead of our typical in-studio face-to-face conversations, as we are all in our homes. So once again, candidates, thank you for joining us here on the program. Well, our conversation will work like this. I have compiled a list of questions for the candidates to discuss, which I believe are of importance for our state government in the next 2 years. In an effort to have our candidates answer as many questions as possible for the majority of our questions, each candidate will get 60 seconds to give a response to each question I ask, with each candidate as well getting 30 seconds for rebuttal time. If I feel we haven't gotten enough time to discuss the issue, we'll continue a back and forth discussion, and we'll rotate on which candidate will get the first response on each question. We drew for the order prior to starting our broadcast today, and the order will go Shannon Latham, followed by Bennett Smith, and then Karen Koenig. So we will start with our first question, and Shannon, you're first up, and I'm going to break away a little bit from the format of the 60 seconds for an answer and 30 seconds for a response here in this first question, allowing each candidate to give one single 90-second answer. And as I mentioned before, moments ago, one of you will be selected by the voters of House District 54 to fill a seat that's been held for a number of years by former Speaker Upmeyer. And in your 90 seconds, please tell us why you think you're the best person to fill this position. Shannon?
Former Speaker Upmeyer certainly did a great job of serving North Iowa. They would be big shoes to fill, but I would certainly welcome that opportunity. I'm fortunate enough to call her a friend, and she's been a great mentor. I think one thing Representative Upmeyer has done well, and that is to meet with people. So one of the words of wisdom she's given me is to make sure you remember you represent the people from North Iowa. So that's why I've been out knocking on doors, this spring I was holding video coffee chats, because I really do believe if you're going to represent the people, you need to hear from them about what matters to them, the people who are working and living here and raising their family. Also, I was raised in Green, Iowa. I've raised my own children here in Franklin County. So it would be such an honor to represent North Iowa in the State House.
All right, Shannon. Bennett?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Bob, for hosting the forum at KGLO. Really appreciate that. I think it's great for voters to hear from the candidates. So thank you for that. I think there's several reasons why I would make a very good legislator. I do appreciate the service that Speaker Upmeyer provided for the district. But I believe that I have the experience the knowledge and the judgment to be an effective legislator because of my job at NIAC, teaching history and political science, my service with the nonprofit groups that I'm a part of here in the Clear Lake area, and then most importantly, my service on the Clear Lake City Council. As an elected official, you really learn a lot about the issues that you have to deal with in relationships with the county and the state. And so I think that's very important. And I think that gives me a real effective start, or foundation, I should say.
All right. And Karen, your comments on this first question. Whoops, there's a second to go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do appreciate you having us this evening or today. One of my strengths is the fact that I have been an educator for more than 20 years. And I know my weaknesses, I know my strengths, and I know that all three of the candidates running for District 54 would do a wonderful job. But the reason I think that I would try harder is because I feel that I have the ability to work beside both sides of the aisle. I was basically born a Republican, and a lot of the farm families that I know tend to run Republican, and I was very much so, and even campaigning for Reagan as a high schooler. But I also feel that the parties aren't the main issue, but the main issue is being able to look at the issues and work across the aisle and make sure that you can get both sides to work together. And with my experience negotiating with our education association, I think that that was a benefit that will definitely help me in the House.
All right. Thank you for all your responses. And now our next question, and Bennett, you'll start this round of questions. The COVID-19 pandemic has ruled our lives for the last 7 months, and Governor Reynolds and those who work under her have received a lot of criticism regarding the way that state government has handled the pandemic. What in your mind should have been done differently to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the question, Bob. I think it's a very serious crisis. In fact, I read an article today that we're seeing new records for hospitalizations today in Iowa because of COVID-19 and increasing deaths. I think the nature of the crisis determines the nature of your response. So in this case, what I wish the governor had done was to mandate the protocols necessary to contain the spread of the virus more effectively. So, this issue of a mask mandate is really a small sacrifice that all of us can make in situations where it's really needed. And obviously where it's not needed, we don't have to wear it. But I think mandating those protocols would have been crucial, because then you don't have to close down the economy, and you can also sustain the economic recovery. You can save lives and jobs by doing that.
Karen?
I would agree with Bennett. I also believe that we also need more local control when it comes to schools. The option at schools not being forced to go face-to-face to be able to receive funding is not correct. We need to make sure that that is something that local control is available.
Shannon? And Shannon, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. The joys of doing a Zoom meeting, right?
Yeah. So I believe that we all want to do what we can to have the most safe work environment, business environment, and it's always easier to play armchair quarterback. And what we know today is so much different than what we knew back in March. I can't imagine being in the governor's shoes as all of this was, this pandemic was first introduced, and there was just so much uncertainty then, and there's still uncertainty now, but for sure we know a lot more now. As a business owner, I know we continue to change our protocols. We continue to look to CDC and guidelines to see what we need to do in our business. But I also believe that we need to allow people and businesses to operate as as they're comfortable with. So I'm glad to see that our small businesses are opening. It's so important for our economy to have strong small businesses. And I guess that I just would welcome an opportunity to work on some recovery issues.
Okay, 30-second response as we go back to Bennett.
Yes, I think the key issue though is, for example, Iowa has, as far as population, about 3 million people. Minnesota's not quite double that, but we've got almost as many COVID cases as they do. So again, I think that it's important to, again, if you emphasize the protocols and we bring everybody together in a bipartisan fashion, we reduce the number of problems we have with hospitalizations, deaths, and job loss, frankly. So I think we all just need to join together on that. Thank you.
All right. Karen, your 30-second response.
I did some traveling this summer, went to Ohio where they have the mask mandates, and it was just second nature. Everyone wore masks. And I really think that that's something that would be much more accepted in our state if it had happened earlier. And so we need to make sure we're following those CDC guidelines and not making our own rules.
And final 30-second response on this question, Shannon Latham.
Sure. Under the Iowa Code, there is no authority for a statewide mask mandate. I do agree with the other candidates. I think it would be important for us to sit down in a bipartisan fashion and talk about it.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. And Karen Koenig, you'll start this round. What should state government be doing in dealing with the coronavirus in the near future, especially heading into the winter months?
That is a very good question. And going into the winter months, there will be more of us inside. And being a teacher, it makes me a little nervous being in classrooms with 20 to 30 kids at a time. And I have a feeling that there will be an increase in cases. And I think that the main way we're going to deal with it is everyone needs to make sure that they're following safety guidelines. Lots of hand washing, making sure that the masks are being worn properly, and making sure that we have a way to trace where and when the individuals who may contract COVID end up, so that we can find who else has been exposed.
Shannon Latham.
In my experience working in business, I know that people support what they help create. And I also know that just because I own the business doesn't mean I always have all the right answers. So in this particular instance, I think, again, we need to give people a seat at the table who are healthcare professionals, who are involved with education, who are involved in areas where we have large numbers of people together. So I think, again, sitting down, talking over, instead of just getting angry or trying to shame people, I think we all just need to work toward resolution because we do have something in common. We all want what's safe and best for those around us.
Bennett Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I think, I use the example out at NIAC. I think we've done a very good job under Steve Schultz at, employing the protocols, as Karen mentioned. I think those are really the key. With the proper protocols, we can get our way through this, but I think it's adhering to those that is really the key, whether, again, it's your local business, college, K through 12, whatever it might be. I think we just need the kind of leadership that, will bring people together.
30-second responses. Karen Koenig.
Well, knowing people in the business world, I know that it's very hard for our communities and for different restaurants and such that to be able to do well and to be able to prosper during these times. So I think another thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we're finding other alternatives to help those businesses find some other way to go around and make sure that we keep people healthy that are working there.
Shannon Latham, 30 seconds.
So I think that's an interesting point. I do think there are a lot of COVID recovery programs already in place. And I think if there's one thing this pandemic has taught us, it's that we need to be flexible and we need to be able to adapt. So again, I think that we need to make sure that we're not changing how we're measuring it. As far as, before we were like, well, gosh. I guess I just want to say that, yeah, I think we just need to be able to adapt and be flexible.
And Bennett Smith, your final response, 30 seconds.
Yes, I would agree with Shannon on that. I think that's a key part of the issue is to adapt to the circumstances we're in, but I just think that's a lot easier if you've got more compliance on the protocols. So I think that's the key factor there.
You're listening to a conversation with the House District 54 candidates here on your hometown news station, AM 1300 KGLO and KGLOAM.com as we move along to the next question. And Shannon Latham, you will start this round. And an advisory board that Governor Reynolds assembled in mid-June has made 56 recommendations for jumpstarting Iowa's economic recovery from the pandemic. The top recommendation is for the state to take steps to make childcare more affordable and accessible. What do you think the state can do to accomplish that goal?
I know that as a working mom, even back 19 years ago, that affordable childcare was an issue, and especially in some of our rural communities. I think some of the, it's just heavily regulated for one thing, so we could take a look at that. Also, yeah, I think definitely taking a look at maybe some of the loosening of the guidelines that has happened since the pandemic can help. And then also we just need to find a way to be able to help more people get into childcare, whether that's partnerships with communities, whether that's tax incentives for employers, but somehow developing some strategic partnerships and getting more people involved in helping solve this dilemma.
All right, Bennett Smith, 1 minute.
Yeah, it really is a problem out there. People I talk to, accessible and affordable childcare has become a very significant issue. During the pandemic, over half of the licensed ones in Iowa have closed, for example. So it is a real crisis. Now, the legislature last year did address this to some degree. They passed 5 pieces of legislation. For example, one of them was to deal with the cliff effect for the child care tax credit for folks that as they made more money, they lost that benefit. And so I think they did the right thing there to try and incentivize this type of thing. But I think one idea we could look at really is to try to work with churches and other nonprofits to develop more child care centers. Whether, again, we can do that and the regulations involved with that. I just think we have to creatively explore some different ways to expand those opportunities and to raise the pay for folks that work in that area. Thank you.
Karen Koenig, your minute.
Thank you. I know that childcare is an issue that is of great importance, and I know that even before COVID, Iowa Falls, where I teach, has had issues with having a childcare desert, and so they have done some different things with trying to help with grants and funding to help open another new daycare in the area to help them out. And that's something that we could work on, is some sort of funding grants to be able to open new daycare situations, childcare situations. And I like the partnership ideas that Shannon talked about. And I think that community colleges, and as those students go to work in their early childhood education, they may be able to use some of those students to also help with provide part-time workers in childcare type facilities as well.
We move to 30-second responses. Shannon Latham.
Well, I know employers see a value, and they also see more productivity when their employees are able to feel safe and comfortable with where their children are. So I think we just need to take a look at some tax incentives, some sort of structure to really help provide that sort of incentive to increase the amount of childcare available.
Bennett Smith, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think whatever we can do to incentivize or reduce regulations to expand this as quickly as possible, particularly in this pandemic, I think we need to move on. So I do think that will be a crucial priority for the upcoming legislative session.
Karen Koenig, your final 30 seconds.
I think incentivizing and increasing childcare is important, but I also don't want us jumping the gun and going into more childcare without regulating who's opening those childcares. We need to be very careful about that as well.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. And Bennett Smith, you start here with the responses. Another recommendation from that advisory board that we talked about deals with access to broadband internet, especially in rural areas. What can state government do to encourage the expansion of broadband access in rural Iowa?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bob. I think that's an investment we have to make because, frankly, the technology in agricultural equipment has advanced so much that, they use this in their equipment. And not only that, but for schools and other places, high-speed broadband is essential in this type of economy. So I think the state needs to look at investing this more. Now, I think in the last few years, the Republicans have done a pretty good job with the budget overall. We're sitting on an ending balance of about 305 million, and then we've got about 800 million in reserves. And I've got some concerns about some of the other programs that I think should have been funded, like Medicaid and some other things. Maybe we'll get into that later, but I think we need to make some of these investments with some of this money for the future for rural, to promote sound economic development in rural and small town Iowa. So thank you.
Okay, Karen Koenig, you're Bennett.
Thank you. This is an example of why this is so important itself. I live out in the middle of nowhere in a dead zone, and I don't get cellular reception in my house. So I have to have my own Wi-Fi to be able to even have this Zoom meeting. And so I understand it's very essential. And I think that funding for that has to be found. And there must be ways that we can move funding from one place to another, sort of like the rural electric, how it expanded throughout our communities. And I think that there must be something that we can do to improve the Wi-Fi, the broadband access throughout our district.
Shannon Latham, your minute.
I think the pandemic has made us even more aware of how important connectivity is across the district, whether it's telecommuting, whether it is teleeducation or telehealth. I'm not convinced, however, that funding is what is crippling us right now. It might be a situation where back when the fax machine was first invented, people didn't even realize there was a need for it. So when broadband first came out and we talked about it, we didn't see the greatest need that there is now. So I know it is a forefront issue for the governor. I know that she's made money available, and last fall there was even an Empower Rural Iowa grant announced. So somewhere we need to find out where that kink is, where that bottleneck is, and connecting people who can partner, like somebody like a CL which Clear Lake's a great example. How can we replicate that across the state? I think the question.
All right, 30-second responses. We go to Bennett Smith.
Yeah, I agree. CLTEL is fantastic. And I think this notion of public-private partnerships is very important. I think it just takes the leadership to get it done. And I think we could do that. And we've done that very successfully in Clear Lake on any number of projects here recently. So I think that is part of the solution.
Karen Koenig, your 30-second response. Karen?
I agree also.
Go ahead.
That, I agree that we need to have funding, and I'm not sure where it comes from. Again, I'm an educator, and I will look into more research to do this, but I really don't know for sure where the best place to be. I'm not going to make up an answer.
All right. Shannon Latham, your 30-second final response.
I know there have been several bills that have been floated, several bills that have passed about broadband and the need to connect Iowa. I think that they serve as a great foundation, and I believe that the current pandemic has shown us just the importance of working together and using those as a foundation to move forward and connect even more people.
All right, we'll move on to the next question, as once again we're Speaking with the candidates for House District 54 here on your hometown news station, AM 1300 KGLO. And Karen Koenig, you're next up to start. And when dealing with a budget, should the state look at what's happened in the last 7 months and be better prepared financially in dealing with something like a pandemic?
Yes. I myself am a big fan of Dave Ramsey, and I know that in his teachings, you start with your $1,000 as an emergency fund. And I really think that the state needs to be run in a similar way. And we need to make sure that we've got that rainy day fund to be able to take care of emergencies. And guess what? This 7 months that we've been through was a pretty good example of what kind of rainy days can come when we don't have any idea of what's going to happen. So yes, I really believe that there needs to be planning ahead for emergencies.
All right. Shannon Latham, your minute response.
I think our state's really fortunate that we were in the economic position we were. So fortunately, it helped us weather this storm just because of the strong economic position we were already in.
Bennett Smith?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we do have some pretty good reserve funds right now, in large part because the federal CARES Act money that was provided has backfilled certain parts of the budget. I think the Revenue Estimating Commission came out yesterday and indicated that they anticipate a 4% revenue gain for next fiscal year. But again, the wild card or the headwinds they mentioned were the impact of drought, the derecho, the pandemic, and then I would throw in, of course, the trade war that so dramatically affected Iowa farmers. So hopefully we can make some progress on that. I don't think tariffs are helpful, and we'll just have to see how some of these factors play out.
All right. We'll go to 30-second responses if you have any, and we start with Karen Koenig.
I really don't right now.
All right. Shannon Latham?
I think Iowa certainly had the perfect storm when you talk about the derecho and the pandemic and all of the other challenges that were thrown our way. But fortunately, our state leaders have done a really great job of maximizing CARES funds. I know that, for example, I was just thinking about how they were put toward helping local meat processors, because that was another issue that came up during the pandemic. Certainly, another way to help our Iowa farmers is to look for new markets and to add value, just like there was the soybean crushing plant that was announced yesterday in Shell Rock. I'm looking for opportunities like that. So I just really would welcome an opportunity to work with state leaders like Iowa Secretary of Agriculture and Director of Economic Development to look for new opportunities and new ways to gain revenue for our state.
All right. Shannon, and thank you. And Bennett Smith, your 30-second response.
Sure. The only thing I would add on the CARES Act money, just I understand the governor putting $490 million into the unemployment trust fund. I think that was important to maintain the tax table for businesses so that their taxes did not go up. The only thing I wish is that she had considered borrowing from the federal program in that regard, because she could have done that for 2 years at 0% interest. So that would have given us more flexibility with the rest of that CARES Act money for healthcare needs and other things. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Bennett. And let's move on to a question that doesn't deal with the pandemic, looking at some other issues here in state government. And Shannon Latham, your turn to start here. Governor Reynolds, at the end of that elongated legislative session, signed a police reform bill into law, where she said at the time of the bill signing that this is not the end of our work. It's just the beginning. What more work needs to be done with police reform? Shannon Latham.
So I do believe that there are opportunities for police reform. Again, I think that's an opportunity to learn more about the issue, talk with those who are closely involved with it. And I think that's where, again, we can sit down and have these productive conversations.
Bennett Smith. Yeah, I think our police and law enforcement are under tremendous stress in many ways. And I think sometimes when a national incident occurs, however tragic it might be, that sometimes the political dynamic overreacts. And I don't know, I know the Clear Lake PD, Saragordo County Sheriff's Department, we've got some terrific people as well in the rest of the district, Franklin County and Butler County. So while I understand the need to look at certain things, chokeholds and things, whatever it takes to improve our training and things like that to deal with different populations, I'm all for training and education. But I think we have to be very careful that we support the men and women of law enforcement in what they do. So thank you.
Great. Karen Koenig, your minute response.
I also believe that we need to offer support to our people in blue. And I believe that a lot of that deals with training and making sure that we also have support not only for them, but also for the people of our state when it comes to mental health issues. And I know that if we had more funding to help with mental health issues, then I believe that the police and the officers wouldn't have to deal with as many other issues as they have to deal with as well.
All right. We move into 30-second responses. Shannon Latham.
It seems like the news that tends to make the headlines, especially as it relates to people who are in emergency service, tends to be more negative rather than positive. There are so many great examples out there. I was just thinking about the Mason City Police Chief, and there's so many great stories of them being involved in the community, reaching out, having so much compassion for others. I think it would be so great if we can find ways to help tell those stories and also help the general population understand the training that's already involved.
All right, Bennett Smith, your 30-second response.
Yeah, just to touch on an issue that Karen brought up, and I think it's a very important issue, and that's the mental health issue. In Governor Reynolds' proposal before the pandemic hit, the Invest in Iowa Act, there's some discussion about how to fund mental health, and I think that's a robust discussion we need to have, because law enforcement do bear some unique challenges because of the lack of beds. And that's one of the reasons I disagreed with Governor Branstad closing the facilities at Clarinda and Mount Pleasant a few years ago.
All right, Karen Koenig, your 30-second response.
I feel that education is also important, and I agree with Shannon in trying to highlight those positives that occur. But again, I still agree with Bennett as well. With that mental health issue, it's such a challenge with the population that we have here in Iowa and the different emergency services that we need to have provided for everyone.
All right, we'll move on to our next question. And Bennett Smith, you have the start here on this question. Governor Reynolds in August issued the executive order on felon voting rights after the end of the session. That was after her advocating for the legislature to pass a constitutional amendment saying that she believes that the best solution, and that's the best solution because it cannot be changed by a future governor. Do you think the legislature should address this issue again now that Reynolds has issued that executive order?
Yes, and I agree with Governor Reynolds on that. I appreciate the fact that she did that. I thought that was the right move, and I agree with her regarding the need for the legislature to address that issue. I think the key sticking points are surrounding restitution and fees and things like that that need to be paid after someone has completed their sentence. So I think, again, we have to be thoughtful about that, but I think that's another good issue for the legislature to look at. Again, once someone has completed their sentence, completed restitution, to restore their voting rights.
All righty, Karen Koenig, your minute response.
I believe that restoring felon voting rights is an important issue, and I think that she was correct in doing that. I agree. And again, I also agree with Bennett because there are some issues with restitution that some people, if they owe $600,000 or there's an enormous amount some of them owe, and if they come out and they can find, if they're lucky enough to find a job, and especially now post-COVID, working minimum wage, they're never going to get ahead and be able to get those paid.
Shannon Latham, your minute.
I also agree with Governor Reynolds in restoring voting rights.
All right, we'll move on to 30-second responses then, I guess. And Bennett Smith, you start.
Yeah, I think the issue that Karen raised is interesting in terms of, how you handle that if someone owes a great deal of money. I guess I'm a little conflicted in the sense that I think, we don't want to make it too easy in the sense that we want to take felonies very serious. So I think, again, there's a workable and pragmatic solution to that. I just don't have one for you tonight.
All right. Karen Koenig, your 30-second response.
Yeah, this is something that's going to take some work across the aisle and making sure that this gets resolved in a way that can benefit everyone.
All right. Shannon Latham, final response, 30 seconds.
So when I heard that Governor Reynolds was going to be restoring voting rights, I remember reading about it, thinking about it, that it is a good thing. But again, it's one of those issues that I feel like I really would need to take more a deeper dive into before having a really solid plan to move forward.
Okay. We'll move on to the next question. And Karen Koenig, you're our first up on this one. K through 12 school funding is seemingly an ongoing issue at the State House of Legislators. And is it time for the legislature to look at the way school districts are funded and revamp the state's school aid formula?
That is a very good question. I know that in the past, Iowa was considered a #1 public school state, and our ranking has decreased. I believe that the funding is part of the issue. I'm not sure that the system is wrong. I think it's the fact that there are the percentage that is given each year to increase and to support publicly the public education seems to decrease, and that it tends to cause our education system to not be able to keep up with what we need to do to make our education system stay top in the nation. So I think that, yes, we do need to revamp or find a way to come up with a way to fill that so that we can fill the void and make sure that public education receives the funding they need.
All right. Shannon Latham, your minute.
I know that the Iowa House for the past 7 years has increased school funding. When I came to work at our business, I came into a business where it was a family-owned business for 30 some years. And so one of the first questions I always asked, just trying to get a better understanding, was, why do we do it this way? And so I guess that's the question that I would have is, I don't know if that formula is right, but maybe we need to take a look at it, because just because that's the way it's always done doesn't necessarily mean that's the way we should continue to move forward with it.
All right.
I also,
Go ahead. You have 30
I wasn't
seconds.
out of time. Okay, if I wasn't out of time, I was just also going to add that as a business owner and manager, I believe when we give people more flexibility, they can make better decisions. So I guess I'm wondering if that formula might somehow handcuff or tie them into not making as good of decisions if they had more flexibility.
All right. Bennett Smith, your minute.
Yeah, I think it's important for local school boards and superintendents to be able to plan more effectively and more long-term. So one of the proposals I would make is that I think the legislature should provide a more stable level of allowable growth. So you don't have the annual uncertainty and the annual debate. So for example, they could look at, they'd have to negotiate it out, of course, but if they set that at 2%, for example, with allowable growth. So in really good times, for example, and they wanted to do more, they could just do that with a supplemental. And by way of contrast, in a severe recession or something, they could lower it if they had to. But I think providing that stable level allows for superintendents and school boards to plan for the long term in terms of their faculties and other costs. And I think that would be very useful. Now, the trick, again, is to arrive at that level, but that's just an idea.
30-second responses. Karen Koenig.
I agree with Bennett Smith in that that allowable growth, and actually I think state law says that we're supposed to set that allowable growth, I think it's almost 2 years in advance, and it's not been done in many years. That hasn't happened. And so if that were done on time, it would be a great benefit to the administrators that are trying to juggle and balance our budgets and trying to make the best of what they have with their budgets.
Shannon Latham, your 30-second response.
Balancing budgets is always difficult, regardless of what occupation you're in. But I think, again, being able to talk with some school administrators and getting their input and ideas, because they're the people who are most affected by it. And I guess that's what I would like to do, is just have a chance to visit with them and get their input on it.
Bennett Smith, your final 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's an issue that, again, we continue to need to deal with because it just produces too much uncertainty and that reduces the effectiveness of our schools. So I just think we need to handle that.
Move on to the next question. And once again, you're listening to the candidates in House District 54. Karen Koenig, Shannon Latham, and Bennett Smith here on your hometown news station, AM 1300 KGLO and KGLOAM.com, as we are a little over halfway through our talk today. And we talk about K through 12 funding. Let's just move right up the ladder and talk about not only the Regents universities, but the community college level as well. And budgetary issues, especially at the Regents universities, have been connected to the pandemic. And Shannon Latham, your turn to start here. What needs to be done for the long-term future funding for the Regents universities and for our community colleges?
Yeah, so the pandemic has definitely put a pinch on all of those schools. And even through this pandemic, though, we are really seeing still a void in some of those careers that are provided by career technical education. So I just want to make sure that we're still focusing on providing that education where it's needed, providing those resources where it can help provide a return. And we're just going to have to take a look at being able to help those institutions through this pandemic.
Bennett Smith?
Yeah, I think it's very important to invest in our colleges. And at the community college level, for example, for every dollar invested, we get a 10.4% return on that investment. And that's a very, very good return. And part of the upside for that is that the students that graduate from NIAC, for example, where I teach, they stay in the area, they pay taxes, they work in the area. So I would certainly be more of a proponent for investing more in our community colleges because of that return on investment and also the way they work with local employers. Many local employers in the district partner with NIAC on 260E agreements for job training. And I think that's very important in developing a skilled workforce. I support the governor's approach with Future Ready Iowa, but I think, again, I would orient more of this future money toward the community colleges.
Karen Koenig, your minute response.
I agree that the community colleges are very beneficial, and I see it locally in the Iowa Falls area as the students who are dual enrolled with the Iowa Falls schools and also with Ellsworth. And I really do believe that those students do typically stick around in the community, and they are employed in positions that earn more and end up paying more in taxes, which then benefits the whole community. But I do believe that the funding needs to also be there for those state colleges also. Being a graduate of Iowa State, I firmly believe that those the state colleges are also very beneficial, and we need to be funding those as well. But I think that we need to have a balance so that the funding is helping where we have the most students and where we can get the most bang for the buck.
Moving to 30-second responses, and back to Shannon Latham.
Education is certainly critical at all levels. I believe that we're just going to need to take a look at what lessons have we learned through this pandemic? So how can we more efficiently and effectively deliver, we just need to take a look at how we can more efficiently and effectively deliver education and learn from the lessons. Maybe it's through distance learning, look for opportunities to be able to increase our level of service and making the most of the resources we have available.
All right, thanks. Bennett Smith, your 30-second response.
Yeah, again, I have a real concern about the cost of a college education, because when you think about most middle-class families, it's the cost of healthcare and an education that really hurts their budget. So we've got to find a way to stabilize tuition rates at the Regents universities. I think that's just absolutely crucial. Now, one idea we might take a look at is an education tax credit. So for example, whether it's retaining our own college students or trying to draw others in from out of state, I think that's something we could look at.
All right. And final 30-second response to this question, Karen Koenig.
I believe that there's funding out there and it needs to go to places that are going to show the most benefit. And to me, a lot of those tech schools are going to help our businesses and provide workers that are going to stay in the community. And that's where that funding should end up going.
All right. We'll move on to our next question. And Bennett, it is your turn to start in this round. Rural health care. Iowa's rural hospitals took a hit from the pandemic, we know. And does state government need to better address rural health care issues? And if so, in what ways?
Yes, very much so, Bob. It's been a significant issue for rural healthcare providers and other folks that provide services. I know, in Clear Lake, we've got some of these that I've spoken to. So a couple big issues here. One is privatized Medicaid has been very, very difficult, okay? And on a couple levels. One is just the reimbursement rates, and then secondly, the hassle that they have in trying to get claims processed, which then leads to far more cost on their side for staffing and other things. So Medicaid reform will be one thing that would be very important for the next legislature to look at. And I know some on both sides of the aisle, frankly, have talked about that. Now, two pathways, I think, to reform there. One is to improve the privatized system or to go back to the old system. But the other thing I would say is, again, the CARES Act money and some of the excess reserves, we need to support the rural hospitals in a pandemic. So I would do that.
All right, Karen Koenig, your minute response.
As an example of how rural healthcare has changed, my granddaughter was born in the hospital in Iowa Falls, and they no longer deliver babies there. She was one of the last ones that was delivered there. So now women that are expecting need to travel to Ames or to Waterloo or to Mason City to be able to deliver babies. And rural healthcare has changed so drastically, and the number of doctors that are retiring and the few that are replacing them, we need incentives to get more doctors into our rural areas. And I think that it's just going to be a struggle until we find a way to fund those physicians and to encourage them to come to our smaller communities.
All right, Shannon Latham, your minute.
So I agree with Karen, and that's one of the issues I was going to bring up. Is I know it's really hard to attract some of those specialties to these rural areas as well. I know that some of our employees are traveling 30 miles to be, or even greater, as Karen had mentioned, just to be able to have babies. So taking a look at what can we do to provide more of those services? Is it an insurance issue? Is it a liability issue? Or is it really just trying to attract people here? And so I guess that's where I'd like to begin, is to kind of find out what the root of the problem is. And also, a couple of years ago, I know we were hearing really a lot about privatization. It seems like, though, ever since the new director was hired, that things are going better. So I guess that's the other thing I would like to look into. It sounds like there's more accountability for the MCOs. And so I think we do need to take a look at more than one issue that's affecting rural hospitals and rural healthcare right now.
30-second responses, Bennett Smith.
Yeah, I think it is difficult to recruit some of these professionals to rural parts of the state. And it's, perhaps more than just the weather, although I think the weather plays into it. I think what my mind goes with that in terms, and we work hard at this in Clear Lake, and that is building quality of life amenities, okay? Things that will attract people and retain population. So for example, for us, the new wellness center is an important asset, the new splash pad and so on. So I think we have to keep working at that.
Karen Koenig, your 30 seconds.
I agree with Bennett that there are many other ways that we can draw in these new doctors and keep them in our communities. But I also think that there's other funding that's needed to encourage our local folks to, or some way to help them afford healthcare, even just because I know that insurance has gotten much more difficult to keep and to pay for.
Shannon Latham, your final 30 seconds.
I was thinking back to when I was a kid, and when you needed healthcare, you actually had to go to an emergency room, even if it was just something like a kidney infection. So I am really thankful for the changes that have happened with acute care, with clinics that we can go into. And I'm really glad that here in even our small communities like Sheffield, that we are able to have local medical clinics.
In this next round, we're just going to go with minute answers because we're starting to wind up on time, and I want to try to get to as many questions here as possible before we let you give your closing statements. Karen Koenig, you start this round, and once again, just minute responses here. In 2010, Iowa voted for a constitutional amendment, Iowans did, to create the Outdoor Recreation and Natural Resources Trust Fund. But to this day, the fund sits empty because the legislature has not approved the 3/8 cent sales tax increase that's needed for that fund. Is it time for the legislature to do what the voters wanted them to do 10 years ago?
Absolutely. It is time. And that sales tax, it's been sitting there. And having worked for Franklin County Conservation for 6.5 years, that is something that would benefit everyone in the state of Iowa. It would help our environment. It would help have us more outdoor spaces for people to get outside, especially during this COVID craziness. We need that for our mental health. We need that for just general physical health. So yes, I think it is time.
All right, Shannon Latham, your minute.
So I grew up fishing and have a great appreciation for those who are sportsmen. I do know that there's always two sides of every story. So I'm curious as to what's happened and why that hasn't been implemented. And that's what I'd like to learn more about.
Bennett Smith, your minute.
Sure, I fully support funding the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. I know the governor has proposed in her Invest in Iowa Act a 1 cent sales tax increase that would use the 3/8 there to fund that. Now, the governor would like to change the formula of some of the things in that, and I'm not sure I agree with that because I think we do need to provide the funding for outdoor trails and a lot of amenities on that side of it, and water quality, and frankly, habitat for waterfowl and pheasants, because hunters spend a lot of money in this state, and I think it's important that we improve areas for them to increase those populations. Now, I will say I'm a little nervous about raising the sales tax to 8% just because as a headline number, I'm a little concerned in terms of economic development, how that would play out. So I almost wish there was another funding mechanism for that trust fund, but it's certainly something I think we should do.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions here and 30 or so second responses. Shannon, we start with you. Minimum wage, time to explore increasing the state's minimum wage, and if so, what should it be and why?
So I know that here, even in my small community, I have to pay more than minimum wage to be able to attract and retain workers just at my pumpkin patch. So I know that there's more demand for workers than there are workers available. So really the marketplace is determining that without the government increasing the minimum wage.
Bennett Smith?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't affect a lot of folks, but again, I mentioned the headline number on the sales tax last question. I think this is another kind of headline number for labor. It's been at 725 in Iowa for quite some time. So I would actually support a modest increase of a quarter per year for the next 3 years, up to $8 an hour. I think, again, we have to be careful of the impact on small business, but I would certainly consider something like that proposal.
Karen Koenig, your 30-second response to that.
I would support increasing the minimum wage, and I probably would at least double what Bennett is talking here. And I do like the increments, doing it by steps. I'm not a proponent of jumping right to 15. I just thoroughly believe that so many people, typically those people getting minimum wage, are not as likely to have a whole family to support.
All right, one final question we'll go through, and Bennett, you'll start with this one in about 30 seconds. The bottle bill, it seems like it's a issue that never stops coming up in the legislature. Seems like it comes up every time that we're going to revamp it this year. Never happens. Bottle bill, your thoughts?
Yeah, the grocers are not real excited about this, obviously in the middle of a pandemic. So they're directing people to other centers for that. I don't know. I think, I don't know if increasing it to a dime would make a difference. I think that's something we'd want to study. I think the original purpose, of course, was to prevent littering and so on and so forth. So again, I think we should study that and take into account the balance of interest between some of these groups.
Karen Koenig, your 30 seconds on this one.
I still believe that we should keep that nickel law there. I remember when it first started, and I know that Iowa was much cleaner because of it. And I know that there are people that will still go out and pick those cans up for the nickels where other people won't. And it depends on the individual. And like Bennett says, I know that those businesses don't care for them coming back in, but they'll train us, and they've trained me, and I can wash my cans, and so can everybody else.
All right, Shannon Latham, your final 30 seconds.
So I too believe that the original bottle bills led to a much cleaner Iowa, and I've noticed more cans being dumped now than ever before, probably because a nickel now doesn't mean as much then. I also can appreciate why the grocers are not too excited about it. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can find a way to make redemption centers actually viable. I know here ours closed because they just weren't able to make money at it. So I think studying this issue would make a lot of sense.
All righty, candidates, we are nearing the end of our broadcast time, and now it's time to make your closing statements for the evening. Each candidate gets 2 minutes to make their final pitch on why you should vote for them, and we'll continue with the order that we have been, and we start with Karen Koenig with your final 2-minute statement.
Well, I am willing to represent District 54, to stand up for my friends, my family, and my neighbors in the district. And I will do my best to take my passion to help others, to use my honesty, integrity, and tenacity to stand up and to make sure that I am representing our area of the state to the best of my abilities. I will use the tactics that I've learned when I've negotiated with administration and our education association to be able to go back and forth between the aisles. I know that when I was in negotiations, I learned that if both parties leave with a little bit of angst, then we did our job. We can't have everybody happy if everybody gives a little bit. And that's my plan. I decided to run because I have this wonderful little granddaughter that you can see in the pictures back here, that I want to leave my world a better place for her when it's her world. And my grandfather told me when I borrowed things to make sure that I returned them in as good a shape or better. And I think that we should do that with our world. And so that's why I'm running. And I would like to represent the people of our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for joining us tonight. Shannon Latham, your final 2-minute response.
So agriculture and small business and career technical education are more than my platform issues. They're really my passions. So I would really appreciate an opportunity and feel honored to serve House District 54 so that I could put my 25 years of business experience, my real world experience was starting businesses from the ground up and helping provide employment opportunities to work. So we've got somebody in the legislature who can represent North Iowa values, somebody with real world experience. And I am the mom of 2 young adults. I want them, as well as everyone else's kids and grandkids, to have opportunities right here in North Iowa. It's also why I support career technical education, because I know the students who graduate from NIAC, 90% of them are going to stay in the area. Having a skilled workforce is a detriment to growing businesses. So when we can keep our workforce here, our trained workforce here, it also helps our businesses. That's not enough. We need to attract people to this area too. So I would love to put that passion and energy to work into helping attract people to this area, talking about the quality of life that we have here, and really just helping grow North Iowa together.
Shannon Latham, thank you for your participation. And we go to the final statement by Bennett Smith.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Bob, for hosting the forum and KGLO. I think it's very important for the public. I want to thank the other candidates as well. Also, I'd like to thank the public for taking the time to watch this, and I hope it's been beneficial in getting to know me better and my views on some of these issues. I would like to invite everyone who wants to learn more about my candidacy to visit my website at bennettsmithforiowa.com. And I think just in closing, I think while we face a short-term crisis amid the current pandemic, we also face a long-term crisis in our lack of skilled workforce that must be addressed if we are to grow Iowa for the next generation. The key to growing Iowa for the next generation is to address these essential quality of life issues that we've talked about this evening. For example, reforming our healthcare system, conserving our natural resources, improving educational outcomes, and promoting sound economic development in rural and small town Iowa. So I think those can be an important source of competitive advantage for Iowa and improve the quality of life for all Iowans. So my view is Iowans deserve an independent voice in the Iowa legislature, and I would appreciate your vote on November 3rd. So thank you, everyone.
Bennett, thank you very much. And once again, Bennett Smith, Shannon Latham, and Karen Koenig, we thank you for agreeing to join us to discuss the issues, and we wish you the best of the luck here in the 2020 election. So those are the candidates for House District 54 that have joined us today here on KGLO. And you can also watch the video of this by heading online to KGLOnews.com at our KGLO News Facebook and Twitter sites. Now we have another candidate forum coming up, House District 53. Sharon Steckman and Simon Abella, they'll be joining us next week on Wednesday morning during the typical time frame that we have Ask the Mayor, but that'll be at 9 o'clock Wednesday morning next week on a KGLO. The program will be rebroadcast at 7 p.m. on Thursday night, October 22nd. You've been listening to a discussion of the issues with the candidates for House District 54 here on your hometown news station, AM 1300 KGLO Mason City and KGLOnews.com. I'm Bob Fisher.